the CCA made $1.6 billion in profit in 2016 from privately owned prisons. Are black people the reason that marijuana is illegal in the United States? I believe the answer to that question is yes. It's a very clear yes, and allow me to explain why. First, let me say, if black people in the United States stopped smoking marijuana for 2 years, marijuana would be legal. If black people and Hispanics stopped smoking marijuana for 1 year, marijuana would be legal. Truth is, this is a huge source of revenue for the United States government, privately owned prisons, judges, police officers, defense attorneys, public defenders, sheriffs, deputies, the whole nine. Obama signed an order allowing state laws to have impunity to federal laws, allowing states to legally grow and sell the crop under certain conditions, which made the crop taxable for the states. Marijuana is the largest cash crop in the United States of America. Colorado was one of the biggest states to adopt the ruling and begin making massive profits. Now we see shares on the stock market beginning to climb for these companies, which means more money for the government, right? So what's the big problem? Why is weed still illegal? Because with weed being illegal, not only does the government have a way of taxing weed, they also have a system of subjugation for minorities. Now, all the time you will hear people like Ben Shapiro or Stephen Crybaby Crowder or Gavin McInnes blabbering about crime for black people is disproportionate. Well, according to several different studies, the irrefutable fact is that weed plays a huge part in the supposed crime rate of disproportionate magnitude. First off, I should mention that there are many prisons that are privately owned. In case you didn't know, there is no such thing as a business owner who wants to make less money, which is why the correctional facility title was probably the biggest fallacy in human history. Prisons do not lower the crime rate. They increase the crime rate. We have the largest incarceration population on the entire planet, meaning more people incarcerated than some countries or states even have in total population, and the second highest incarceration rate, growing towards the #1 spot. You can find documented evidence of meetings where people are encouraged to become shareholders in privately owned prison because of recidivism rates, or the rate at which each prisoner is likely to return. This scheme is designed to ruin people's lives, not correct them. For example, just a few weeks ago down in Cartersville, Georgia, over 70 kids at a party were all arrested for the same one bag of weed. Does anybody want to guess what race those kids were? No one claimed the weed was theirs, is the supposed explanation from the police, but the students are saying the opposite. What would I do if I was a cop at a house party and found drugs and no one wanted to admit to it? Simple. Whose house is it? You live here? You're getting locked up. The reason why this is relevant is because several of those teenagers lost their jobs behind this arrest. Several more of them won't be able to get jobs in the future. Looking at our current prison population, 46% of the offenders are in there with drug charges. Out of 28 major categories in the FBI crime report, 46% all go to one category. 46% of the current population all fall under one category. Not saying that weed is their only offense, but mandatory minimums still exist around these drugs, and many of those offenders remain in jail because of it. And though most drug offenders are non-blacks, studies show that black people are 4 to 10 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than whites, depending on where they live. Blacks and whites use pot at roughly the same population rate, meaning there are 4 times as many white pot smokers as there are black pot smokers. But the black people are 4 to 10 times more likely to be arrested for it, depending on where they live. True story. I've personally been to an all-white party in rich neighborhoods where the cops have busted in on illegal drinking, smoking, and other drugs by white kids, and they made 2 arrests. 2 arrests. Hundreds of beer cans and 2 arrests. The kids they arrested were not charged for illegal drinking. Now, I was 25 years old at the time, and I was going to be a chaperone at the event. I actually had left the event to go to Walmart. Cops were there when I returned. So obviously I didn't snitch on myself and connect me directly to the event. And after about 15 minutes of trying to convince them, they allowed me to clean the party up and end it, let the drunk kids sober up for 2 hours and then clear out. Now, this is relevant because where this happened was also in Georgia. less than 30 miles from Cartersville, Georgia. The parents of the kids who threw the party never heard about the party. Honest on me, that is a complete true story. But I'm not hating at all on the fact that the white kids got away for the most part. I'm glad they got away, and that's whether they were my friends or not. And I'm glad they got away because they were just kids at a party. Nobody was getting hurt. They were having fun and relaxing. And the neighbors ended up calling the cops on them. And although the police had no intentions of arresting them, they decided to just take the two kids that they arrested and part ways. They could have arrested everybody there easily. And they had reason to. But I will say that arresting 70 black kids for an alleged ounce of weed at a party is complete and total bullshit. No alcohol, no other explicit drugs, just weed. Now, if black people all quit smoking pot for 2 years, again, it would be legal. They say that weed is a gateway drug, and it's true. But it's not a gateway drug to get you hooked on other drugs. Weed is the gateway for police to come into black and minority neighborhoods and make arrests. I'm not excusing anyone for doing anything illegal. If it's against the law, it's against the law. What I'm saying is the government loses mass incarceration by a huge chunk if black people actually became woke on the issues and stop smoking. Then, in an effort to reclaim profit, weed would be legal, although heavily regulated and taxed. The other reason why it isn't legal yet is the pharmaceutical industry, which is a complete different topic to discuss. But long story short, the medical use of marijuana would put billions of dollars out of big pharma's hands, even if they assimilated and began using weed for their own sales and research and development. Big pharma even makes profit from side effects, and weed only has 3 major side effects that I know of: hungry, horny, and sleepy. The government could regulate weed by making the legal smoking age 25 years old and tax the business license and the locality of the salesman. That way they could still make arrests. But big pharma and mass incarceration right now are just too good to be true. And it's up to us to change that. If pharmaceutical companies rely on a single cash crop to supply their consumer bases, all sorts of suppliers would then be out of a job. Those who benefit from this billion-dollar industry would like to continue to do so, which is why we won't see any major changes in the opioid crisis anytime soon. The opioid crisis is currently declared a national emergency, and at the time at which that happened, only $58,000 was available in the actual fund. Now, money can be added to the fund at any time, but the government does not seem to be in a rush to do so. To further add to my point of minority subjugation, the opioid crisis has been declared a national emergency. When the crack epidemic hit black communities, the solution was the war on drugs. So on one hand, you have people saying, oh, well, education and therapy and government programs are the solution. And when it came to the minorities, well, the solution is to put them in jail, to ruin their lives, to make sure they can't get jobs when they get out of jail. Arrest people, then lock them away for a drug that was literally implanted in their neighborhoods by the CIA. The CIA implanted crack cocaine in black communities. This has been proven over and over to be factually correct. And even if you use common sense, the cocaine traveled to the United States via South America and Colombia in particular. Black people don't own boats and trains and ships and airplanes and the means necessary to ship hundreds of thousands of kilos of cocaine from one continent to another. If black people had enough money to do that, their neighborhoods would have looked much differently to begin with. Which brings me to my next point of the bad neighborhood stigma. When you hear the words bad neighborhood, you typically think of someplace where minorities live, someplace filled with drugs and crime. No place to raise children, basically, which is stupid at best. Crime exists regardless of what race lives in a particular area, regardless of the population of that area. And no offense, but statistically, white people use more types of drugs than blacks. So while blacks and Hispanics account for roughly 30% of the U.S. population, they represent 75% of drug arrests and charges. 46% of all incarcerated inmates have drug charges. That is a massive and overwhelming disproportionate majority. A ridiculous representation of such proportions could only lead to one very clear conclusion. Drugs like weed are illegal because weed is the gateway into arresting and criminalizing minorities, particularly and especially blacks. Now, in closing, I would also like to point out that people like Ben Shapiro would say that the raised maximum sentences for crack cocaine possessions and sales came from black politicians who wanted crack out of their neighborhoods by punishing the participants. He forgot to mention those black political figures made up a small fraction of the group responsible for passing these laws. Every law is signed into existence by the president after passing through several groups of people for several weeks at the very minimum. I mean, in a House committee, the House of Representatives, the Senate, before they make it to the president's desk. Not saying that those black legislative forces are in any way innocent. I'm saying that it is absolutely absurd to point the finger solely at them and saying that this is their fault or their doing. At the end of the day, the institutions responsible for creating the crack epidemic and the war on drugs are government institutions. Now, the personal responsibility of the individuals affected by this occurrence is very relevant, but never more than secondary in a network of circumstances that created the problem. Long story short, black people, don't do drugs. You are killing yourself and the entire community at the will of institutionalized racism.